Imagine this. You're standing in a room with someone who has made an art form of twisting your words. They smile, but behind that smile is calculation. They compliment you, but each compliment carries a hidden blade. Every conversation feels like a chess game you didn't agree to play, and somehow, you always lose. Your stomach tightens, your throat constricts, and somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers, "Why do I always feel smaller after talking to this person?" Here is the uncomfortable truth most people never realize. You don't feel smaller because they are powerful. You feel smaller because you never learned the language of psychological defense. You were taught to be polite, to explain yourself, to seek approval. And manipulators, they feed on that training like wolves feed on wounded prey. But here's what most people will never understand. The Stoics knew something 2,000 years ago that modern psychology is only now confirming. The person who controls their words controls the entire dynamic. Not through aggression, not through volume, but through 5 precise phrases that shift the invisible power balance in any conversation. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, "Words never meant for anyone else's eyes. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." But what he didn't write, what he demonstrated through decades of navigating Rome's most treacherous political landscape, was this. You don't defeat a manipulator by fighting them. You defeat them by becoming unmanipulable. And that begins with your words. In the next few minutes, I'm going to hand you 5 dark phrases. I call them dark, not because they are cruel, but because they work in the shadows of human psychology where manipulators live. These are not insults. They are not attacks. They are verbal shields forged from Stoic philosophy, designed to do one thing: make anyone who tries to control you realize, instantly, that they chose the wrong target. If you use even one of these phrases correctly, you will feel something shift, not just in the other person's eyes, but in your own chest, in your own spine. Stay with me. Understanding the manipulator's operating system before I give you these phrases, you need to understand something crucial. Manipulators don't operate on logic. They operate on emotional extraction. Their entire strategy depends on one thing: your reaction, your anger, your defensiveness, your desperate need to explain yourself, to be understood, to prove you're a good person. The average person walks into these traps blindfolded. Someone accuses them of something untrue, and they immediately launch into justification. No, that's not what I meant. Let me explain. They don't realize that explanation is exactly what the manipulator wanted. Now you're defending. Now you're below them. Now you're performing for their judgment. The foolish man believes that if he just explains well enough, the manipulator will understand and be fair. The Stoic knows that understanding was never the goal. Control was the goal, and you just handed it over. Epictetus, the former slave who became one of history's greatest philosophers, taught this: it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But let me add something Epictetus implied but never said directly. How you react determines what others believe they can do to you. React with panic, and they learn you can be panicked. React with anger, and they learn your buttons. React with desperation, and they smell blood. But what happens when you respond with what I call weaponized calm? They don't know what to do. Their entire playbook becomes useless. It's like throwing a punch at fog. The energy goes nowhere, and suddenly they're the ones off balance. Let me show you exactly how to create that fog. Phrase 1. I notice you're trying to. Here's the first phrase. Memorize it. Practice it. Let it become part of your verbal arsenal. I notice you're trying to. That's it. Simple. Devastating. Why does this work? Because manipulation only functions in the dark. The moment you name what someone is doing, calmly, without accusation, without emotion, you flip on the lights. And manipulators scatter from light like roaches from a kitchen. Picture this scenario. Your colleague corners you before a meeting. They smile warmly and say, "I just want to make sure we're aligned here. I mean, I know you've been under a lot of stress lately, and sometimes when people are stressed, they don't communicate as clearly as they normally would." The average person hears this and thinks, wait, have I been communicating poorly? Maybe I've been stressed. Maybe I should apologize. No, what just happened is a technique called priming. They planted seeds of self-doubt before the meeting so that anything you say can be dismissed as stress-related confusion. The Stoic response. You look at them directly and say, I notice you're trying to frame my input as unreliable before the meeting starts. Then you stop talking. You don't elaborate. You don't accuse. You don't ask why. You simply name it and let the silence do its work. Watch what happens to their face. Watch the micro-expressions. The brief flash of surprise, then recalculation, then retreat. Because suddenly the game is visible. And games lose power when everyone can see the board. Seneca wrote, "A sword never kills anybody. It is a tool in the killer's hand." The manipulator's sword is hidden implication. When you name it, you take the sword away. Phrase 2. You might be right. Here is the second phrase, and I warn you. This one will feel counterintuitive. It will feel like losing. It is not. When a manipulator attacks your character, when they bait you with criticism designed to trigger a defensive spiral, you say, "You might be right." 3 words, then nothing. Let me explain why this phrase creates what I call the mirror effect, where their attack reflects back without ever penetrating your core. The psychology here is simple but profound. Manipulators expect resistance. They prepare for it. They have counter-arguments loaded, escalations planned, backup accusations ready. Their entire strategy requires you to push back so they can push harder. When you say you might be right, you offer no wall to push against. They stumble forward into empty space. But here's the deeper Stoic truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." When you say you might be right, you're not agreeing with them. You're demonstrating that their opinion has no power over your internal state. You're showing them, and yourself, that your identity doesn't depend on winning this moment. A friend once told me about his father, a quiet man who built a successful business in a hostile industry. Whenever competitors tried to bait him in meetings, whenever they implied he was too slow or too old or too out of touch, he would simply nod and say, "You might be right about that." Then he would go back to building. 20 years later, most of those competitors were bankrupt. He was still standing. The foolish man needs to win the conversation. The wise man knows there's a larger game, and composure is how you win it. Phrase 3. I'm not going to do that. This is the phrase of boundaries, the phrase of stone walls, the phrase that separates those who are manipulated from those who cannot be. I'm not going to do that. Not I can't. Not I don't think I should. Not well, it's just that. I'm not going to do that. The difference matters. When you say, I can't, you're offering a problem to be solved. The manipulator hears an opening. What if I helped you? What if we moved things around? What if you just tried? But I'm not going to do that is different. It's not a problem. It's a decision. And decisions are walls without doors. Here's a story. There was a young Stoic named Cato the Younger, living in the final days of the Roman Republic. When Julius Caesar offered him peace, power, and security, all Cato had to do was bend, compromise, accept what he knew was wrong. Cato refused. Not with long speeches, not with elaborate justifications. He simply would not do it. This drove Caesar mad. Not because Cato fought him, many fought him, but because Cato could not be negotiated with, could not be bought, could not be moved by any leverage Caesar possessed. Cato had found something inside himself more valuable than anything Caesar could offer or threaten. That is the energy of this phrase. When someone pressures you, through guilt, through obligation, through social expectation, through veiled threats, you look them in the eye and deliver 7 words. I'm not going to do that. You don't need to justify. Justification is negotiation, and negotiation signals weakness. Your decision is the explanation. Phrase 4. This is the last time we discuss this. Now we enter darker territory. This phrase is for patterns, not incidents. For the manipulator who returns again and again to the same well, hoping that persistence will break you. This is the last time we discuss this. Then you follow through. Absolutely. Without exception. Why is this phrase so powerful? Because manipulators often rely on what psychologists call wearing down, the repeated application of pressure until resistance crumbles. They've learned that most people will eventually give in just to make the discomfort stop. Your commitment is being tested, and most people fail that test. The average man says no the first time, then no again the second time. Then well, maybe. The third time, then caves the fourth time. The manipulator learns, I just need to ask 4 times. But when you say this is the last time we discuss this, you're announcing something different. You're announcing that you are willing to end access. You are willing to let silence stretch forever. You are willing to be uncomfortable longer than they are. Epictetus said, No man is free who is not master of himself. This phrase is mastery in action. It says, I have considered this. I have decided. The matter is closed. My inner fortress has walls, and this topic is now outside them. But here's the critical part. You must mean it. If you say this and then discuss it again, you have taught them your words are empty. You have taught them your walls are decoration. Say it only when you are prepared to enforce it. Then enforce it like gravity. Impersonal. Absolute. Inevitable. Phrase 5. I wish you well. This is the final phrase, and it is perhaps the most stoic of all. When a manipulator escalates, when they bring their full arsenal of guilt, accusation, and emotional weaponry, when they want you angry, defensive, engaged, you look at them calmly and say, I wish you well. Then you leave. The conversation, the room, the relationship, whatever needs leaving. Let me tell you why this phrase creates what I call the blessing dismissal, perhaps the most psychologically devastating response possible. When you say, I wish you well, you accomplish 3 things simultaneously. First, you demonstrate that you hold no anger. Anger would mean they affected you. It would mean they have power. By genuinely wishing them well, you show that their attempts to control your emotional state have completely failed. Second, you end the dynamic without cruelty. You give them nothing to use against you, no harsh words to quote, no aggression to point at. You leave them with only their own behavior to reflect on. Third, you close the door. This phrase says, whatever was between us, it's finished. Not because I'm wounded, not because I'm running, but because I've decided to move toward peace, and you are not part of that direction. There's a story about Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps and later wrote about finding meaning in suffering. After the war, he encountered people who had collaborated with the regime, who had done terrible things. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't engage in public condemnation. He simply continued building his life, his work, his legacy. When asked about those people, he said something remarkable. He wished them the insight to understand what they had done and the courage to become better. That is the energy of, I wish you well. You are not saying, I forgive you. Forgiveness is a separate journey. You are saying, your path and my path have diverged. May yours lead somewhere worthwhile. Mine will. The transformation, let me bring this together. These 5 phrases, I notice you're trying to, you might be right, I'm not going to do that. This is the last time we discuss this, and I wish you well. They are not magic spells. They are tools. And like all tools, they only work if you understand the philosophy behind them. That philosophy is this: you cannot control manipulators. You can only control yourself. And when you control yourself completely, manipulation becomes impossible. The Stoics understood that freedom is not external. You can be a prisoner and be free. You can be an emperor and be enslaved. Freedom lives in the space between stimulus and response, that gap where you choose who you will be. 6 months from now, you could be the same person you are today, still reactive, still explaining yourself to people who were never interested in understanding, still giving away your peace in exchange for their approval. Or you could be different. You could walk into rooms where manipulators wait and feel nothing, not because you're cold, but because you're complete. Your validation comes from within. Your boundaries are made of stone. Your words carry the weight of someone who has done the inner work. I want you to imagine the next time someone tries to manipulate you. Maybe it's tomorrow. Maybe it's today. Picture their familiar tactics, their well-worn approaches. The guilt trip, the subtle put-down, the unreasonable demand dressed as a favor. And picture yourself, not clenching, not preparing defenses, not already rehearsing explanations. Just standing there, breathing slowly, feet planted, with 5 phrases waiting like arrows in a quiver. You don't have to use them all. You may never use most of them, but knowing they exist, knowing you have them, changes something. It changes the energy you carry. It changes what manipulators sense when they look at you. They look for victims. They don't look for Stoics. They don't look for you. I'll leave you with one final thought from Marcus Aurelius, a man who commanded armies, ruled an empire, and spent his nights writing private reminders about how to be a good person. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. You've listened to these words. Now the work begins. Not in tomorrow's confrontation. Not in next week's difficult conversation. Now, in the quiet decision to become someone who cannot be manipulated. Someone who speaks with intention, maintains peace under pressure, and grants no one rent-free space in their mind. The manipulators in your life have operated freely because they never met this version of you. They're about to.